Hi, I'm Antonio Mora with an alternate universes segment, The Great Divide Between Conservative and Liberal Media, and how language subtly and not so subtly conveys bias. First, a personal anecdote. For TV news correspondents and reporters, making slot is a job requirement. It means getting your taped piece filed early enough that it can air at its scheduled time in a newscast. In my 3 decades in television news, I missed slot once, in 1997, when I was covering the trial of British au pair Louise Woodward, who was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in the death of a baby who was under her care. In a story I wrote for ABC's World News Tonight, I used an adjective to describe the mood in the courtroom. As we finished editing the story, less than a half hour before it was supposed to air, the show's anchor, Peter Jennings, to whom my career owes a great debt, called me and asked that I take out the adjective. This was in the old days of editing tape, and the adjective was at the beginning of the story. Bottom line, my video editor couldn't make the fix in time, and the story missed slot, forcing the show to be rearranged so our piece could air later than scheduled. The reason I bring it up is that the writing standards of serious journalists like Jennings have been mostly abandoned by TV news and by many print organizations. Why is this a big deal? Because adjectives are one of the main ways bias creeps into journalism. CNN's coverage of the New York Times story about leaked tax documents that showed President Trump lost more than $1.1 billion during a 10-year period in the 1980s and 1990s is a perfect example. CNN called it stunning, and in a taped piece, a reporter twice called it devastating. Even if it had been stunning and devastating, which is certainly questionable given that Trump has often spoken about his losses and bankruptcies, the anchors and reporters should have followed an old journalism rule. Show, don't tell. Explain to me why it was stunning and devastating. Not a chance. That would require research and reporting. It's easier to just use adjectives. Conservative and liberal media both use adjectives to advance their narratives. They hype stories that hurt those whom they oppose and minimize stories that hurt those whom they support, effectively selling their position without needing to prove their arguments. The bias injected into stories is frequently intentional, but often it's the result of the echo chambers in our media. If almost everyone you work with is dedicated to pursuing a certain political narrative, biased writing becomes automatic, even encouraged. Today's journalists should pay heed to Voltaire, who 300 years ago wrote that the adjective is the enemy of the noun, and to Mark Twain, who later argued that when you catch an adjective, kill it. Journalism should follow basic rules. Don't use adjectives unless they add relevant information. Especially avoid them if they indicate bias. Local TV news stations long ago abandoned restraint and use adjectives all the time to hype stories, hoping that will lead to higher ratings. Traditional network news television, however, is a mixed bag. CBS News seems to be more careful about over-dramatizing, but Jennings' old show, ABC's World News Tonight, is a lost cause. It uses the adjective dramatic as often as The Bachelor does. The difference is that The Bachelor and its audience are in on the joke. World News Tonight constantly uses stunning, devastating, shocking, and tragic. Watch, you'll see. The more well-respected traditional print news organizations are generally more careful. You won't often find the New York Times or the Associated Press abusing adjectives. Google it if you're interested. You'll see how rarely they use adjectives to exaggerate. That is not the case for many websites that cater to the right or to the left. Of course, when their reporters use adjectives such as devastating, it's almost always to describe something involving the other side. Adjectives are like empty calories. Eat too much food with few nutrients and you'll get sick or gain unhealthy weight. Use too many adjectives and you'll get little information or be fed an unhealthy dose of bias. The moral of the story for news watchers is that the more flowery the language, the worse and more biased the reporting is likely to be.